press the bell icon on the YouTube app to never miss a video from Newslaundry.
Welcome to Newslaundry Chhota Hafta. For the full episode, subscribe because it is behind the paywall and only subscribers get access to uncut, complete content. Newslaundry Hafta is our weekly wrap of all that made the news, all that didn't, and all that should have and all that shouldn't have. We agree, we disagree, we critique, and occasionally we beat each other up. But it's all good fun. Subscribe.
This is a Newslaundry podcast and you're listening to NL Hafta.
So on the panel on the Hafta today, we have in the office Manisha Pande. Hi Manisha.
Hi.
Mehraj D Lone.
Hello.
Raman Kirpal.
Hi.
Joining us from Patna, our very own Anand Vardhan. Hi Anand.
Hello.
And joining us is also Yogita Limaye. She is the India correspondent for BBC. She has been with them for 8 years and she has also in the past worked for CNN IBN, and she's reported from Korea, from the Middle East, and has had stints in various parts of the world. She has covered a range of issues including the Syrian conflict, the refugee crisis in Greece, and the North Korea-South Korea never-ending saga. So welcome, Yogita. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
So where are you right now?
I'm in Mumbai. That's where I'm based.
I see. So I believe you're also keeping a watch on what happened this morning at Visakhapatnam. You have BBC crew on the ground there, or are you covering it from Maharashtra? What do you know of what's happening there?
So we don't actually have BBC crew on the ground in Visakhapatnam, but because the BBC launched a Telugu language service about a little over 2 years ago. The great thing is that we have people in the region who can sort of bring in the news for us. And in this odd situation where we're all stuck because of the coronavirus crisis, I mean, ordinarily I can imagine that we would be perhaps already on a flight going to Visakhapatnam at this stage, but obviously we can't do that right now. And so we're relying heavily on the information that is being brought in by, our BBC Telugu colleagues there. We woke up, of course, to these sort of very distressing visuals on social media of people lying on the ground, suffering from breathlessness. And, so far, obviously, the information that we are getting is that hundreds are affected, but the scale, I think, yet quite unknown, and sure. I don't think we'll know it for some time.
Yeah, I mean, the last I saw, there were 5 deaths and they were still rushing people to the hospital. And really scary. This gas leaked and it's called PVC, I think, polyvinyl chloride or something they were saying. So,
we're still understanding sort of how toxic the gas is. I mean, the latest number that we have from our colleagues is that 8 people have died.
Oh, okay.
And it leaked at about sort of 3 a.m. local time, which means, people would have been in their homes and asleep. So actually the disaster sort of response force is going door to door to check whether sort of there are any people who are unconscious in their homes. I mean, we know from, eyewitnesses that residents did run out in a panic. And, that's where I think some of the visuals we're seeing coming from people laying sort of on the ground on the road. But, obviously we don't know how many people are still perhaps in their homes and unconscious. So that's what we know the disaster management team is doing right now.
And I'll just correct myself. At the gas, apparently styrene, PVC was one of the polymers that was made in the factory. That's not really a gas. Anyway, I don't know much about chemistry. So, Yogita, now you've been with the BBC for 8 years. I just wanted to ask you a general media-related question here. The BBC specifically and the foreign media in general are often attacked by certain elements of the Indian media as towing the Western line and that they are not serving Indian interests. Do you face that often in your career when you talk to colleagues who work for Indian news organizations? Other than studio screamers, is that a narrative that also plays out in the community of journalists? And to what extent is it true that there is certain... I mean, I think BBC and CNN maybe less so because they use a lot of Indian correspondents. But The Economist, I have seen certain pieces that they write. I read it and I'm saying clearly someone who's not been to India has written this. Because I guess Economist doesn't really have such a solid Indian crew. Both bits. What do you make of these constant attacks of news becoming so partisan that BBC will only serve Western interests and not the interests of journalism?
Arnab Goswami actually said on a debate that
That?
he appealed to Boris Johnson to lock them up.
Lock whom up?
Lock
So
all
yes,
BBC journalists
I mean,
up.
we've faced a lot of attacks, obviously, from people on television and obviously on social media. We're attacked pretty much all the time, personally as well as sort of on an organization level. I can't say that I've actually been accused of sort of an anti-India bias by anybody I've met in person or, other friends I have sort of in the Indian news space or who are, my fellow journalists who I meet on the ground or on the field. So, I've never been at the receiving end of something like that. But yeah, you very often receive it on social media and on TV. And, it's difficult to comment on sort of other organizations and what their composition is like, simply because I don't actually know. What I know of the BBC, and I think this is a significant change and is something that, in many ways, as a journalist in general, I do feel proud of that. There was a time when even in the BBC, the biggest stories when they broke, you'd have sort of somebody who is foreign flying into this country and reporting from here. That has changed to such a massive extent. I mean, I'm an Indian national. I'm their India correspondent. My biggest sort of range of experience is from India and South Asia. And, that is the writing and the producing, very often I think people have this impression that we just file stuff into London and then they create something out of it, which is sort of entirely not how we operate, actually. Every story that we do here is written by a team that is here, is edited by a team that is here, and then sent to London. And of course, we have editorial processes. So there will be, many pairs of eyes looking for it, simply to follow the rigor of, to make sure that you're not biased.
Journalistic filters, yeah. But the final product is sent. It's a packaged product sent, not raw stuff that now you cook
exactly. So, this entire thing about towing a foreign line. I mean, I'm not entirely sure sort of where that comes in, or perhaps it comes from a place where they don't know the processes.
Okay, does anybody else
Or it comes from a place where they tow the line and they imagine that everybody does the same.
I think in the recent time, 3 incidences where BBC specifically came under fire. One was Kashmir. They were the first to report on protests in Kashmir.
Right.
Till then, we had TV journalists, talking about biryani being eaten by Ajit Doval and normalcy.
Khushi ki leher.
They were the first to bring us a report from Kashmir.
The video footage of the protests, yeah.
Which was happening. And it turned out it was true. There was nothing. I mean, everyone accused them of fake news, but that was... Then I think Yogita herself did a report on Corona from Maharashtra, where she interviewed a doctor who spoke about how unprepared they were. So yeah, I think that also got them a bit of flack.
And the Delhi
but these are
carnage
facts.
that happened in February, the communal violence.
Yeah.
I interviewed Jamie Angus. I think he's director of your World Service Group, right?
Yes.
In March. And
Yes.
it was a revelation to me of how actually the allocation is done. Because Boris Johnson had threatened that because the BBC was clearly not favorable to him during the election, and it does have like a liberal bias. I do think it does. But I think most news organizations around the world do, other than a few which have become very popular. But we can get into the reasons for that later. It is... The parliament has already assigned the funds for the BBC for 7 years. That means if Boris Johnson does anything today, that also has to be by an act of where he has to amend an act in parliament.
Right.
So it doesn't impact today anyway. So it's quite a foolproof way of actually keeping it independent of any kind of influence of even the government. I think it's a clever, because you don't know who's in power 5 or 7 years from now. So no one wants to kind of mess with that. But I would just, if anybody wants to weigh in on this, because I want to just use this opportunity to also talk about the Pulitzer Prizes. So Anand, if you want to weigh in on this, and then we can move.
No, I think BBC was set up under Royal Charter and not Act of Parliament. So they are more accountable. They were more accountable to the lordships and not public officials.
No, the budgets are allocated by the parliament.
That would be done. Means I'm saying about accountability pattern.
Right.
So politicians, Prime Minister, no. Margaret Thatcher famously said that she fought 3 elections against BBC. So, but I am talking about the Indian perspective on BBC, and it has a long history. It also has to do with the Indian diplomatic community. I don't believe that a news platform can be consistently anti something or pro something. I don't believe that biases can only creep in only if it is done from a Western capital and not from their own set of correspondents in a country. So it could be a set of biases which are
the biases could be different, but the bias nevertheless
common in every. So there are two ways. I think it has India has a very two-pronged approach to BBC. There is a generation which is very nostalgic about growing up with BBC. I was one of them. So which in remote places grew up with BBC broadcast and something like that, though very conscious of its and the limitations of its perspective. In 1940, when apart from BBC, when it's a Hindustani service, which was later BBC Hindi, on 11th May 1940, it was set up, if I remember right. And what was expected, and the first criticism that came from the Indian leadership of BBC was that it was the new age technology then for Indians, apart from radio and All India Radio, and the British service, and it didn't cover the Bengal famine of 1943 to the extent that Indians wanted. And it didn't cover. And Mr. Stephens, who was the editor of Statesman, was the one who did it. So it somehow passed its radar. And next, when you have bilateral confrontations or even battles, wars, like in 1965, it was accused of it. Interestingly, in 1970, there is an academic paper by, I think he was, I'm forgetting his name, perhaps Alasdair Princeton. He wrote about the neo-imperialist approach of BBC to covering South Asia. And it was a critique of a documentary called Calcutta. In mid-1970s, Indira Gandhi government asked BBC to pack up for its bias. Then you have in 2001 this modern Asian history teacher at Oxford, Premi Addy, writing a detailed critique in one of Indian newspapers. Then 2008, they were criticized for calling the Mumbai terrorists as gunmen. And then in 2016, obviously, the association of MQM movement with Indian funding, which was even some Pakistani commentators said it was poorly sourced and read like a Chinese whisper written in hurry. So there is a history to it. There are two dimensions to it. One is, which is very nostalgic about it, which grew up with it, which was its window to the world. And then there are apprehensions about the kind of reporting it has done.
I guess it's not a necessarily 2020 phenomenon, but I think the obvious hostility that the media has to serve the country's government, or there is something like, serving a patriotic cause rather than serving news, and the two may not necessarily overlap. And I just want to, for example, now this Pulitzer Prize case, just for context, before we discuss it, and those of you who have read this are aware that Dar Yassin, Mukhtar Khan, and Channi Anand of the Associated Press won the Pulitzer Prize for feature photography, and this is for their work in Kashmir. Now, maybe Mehraj could tell us what exactly the reporting of Associated Press from Kashmir was, but there has been this, I don't want to talk about social media, because social media, they're always pushing back on something or the other, but even many journalists have said that, how can we celebrate a Pulitzer when the media narrative that they were reporting was that India is an aggressor or is unfair of what's happened to Kashmir, or even people like Sambit Patra, he tweeted that anti-India...
So-called Indian journalists.
So-called Indian journalists, anti-India propaganda. So, in that context, A, Mehraj, just tell us what was their coverage like, and B, in times like this, has journalism become such a... is it at odds with the current interpretation of patriotism that we can't even celebrate, Indian journalists winning such a prestigious award? Or is there some truth that it was very one-sided, the coverage? Because I don't know the specifics of these stories. So, on booze, अब आप बताइए आपको क्या प्रॉब्लम क्या है?
ब्रांड चाहिए
3 दिन से क्यों आप हम सबको आप पीट रहे हो?
कौन सा ब्रांड चाहिए?
हुआ क्या हुआ देश में, क्या हुआ जो
ठेके बंद करे लोगों ने यार?
पहले ओके, लॉकडाउन में ठेके बंद हो गए, फिर सरकार, एक सेकंड पहले कॉन्टेक्स्ट दे दें, फिर सरकार ने बोला बॉस ठेके खोल दो, जैसे ही ठेके खुले
line लग गई।
जानवरों की तरह लोग मतलब टूट
जानवरों
पड़े.
की नहीं तरह नहीं था, कहीं पे people were and they would do that in a temple also. It's not that just outside a liquor, just because they're standing outside liquor store you're shaming them. Many people also followed social distancing and waited patiently for booze. Nainital video, did you see?
No.
In hailstorm, they were standing with their umbrellas, maintaining a distance,
Social distance.
waiting for their
but in some thekas there was a free for all.
Yeah.
And so many governments said साला बंद करो, and Delhi government said 70% tax लगाओ. Now उसके बाद भी टूट पड़े लोग. अब इस पर क्या कहना है मनीषा, प्रॉब्लम क्या है?
सबसे पहले मेरी प्रॉब्लम ये है, मैं बोलना चाहूंगी कि बंद नहीं होना चाहिए था, because some people like to drink milk, some people like to drink beer. This is an essential service. No, alcohol.
I hope my niece and nephew aren't listening to this podcast.
No, but what is
कई लोगों को दूध पसंद है, कईयों को beer. मामू आज ऐसा करो, अमूल छोड़ो आज जरा.
If you can have the mother dairy booth open, why can you not have thekas open? It makes no sense. There is nothing. It's not that a beer bottle is going to transmit corona more than a milk bottle, and it's as essential to many people as And in fact, doctors have said you have a glass of beer in the lockdown will probably help you. Will keep you calm and sane. So there was no need for this moralistic approach of saying now ban all liquor.
Journalists also went on. Even Rajdeep gave some moralistic tweet. No?
What does it say about our country and all?
What does it say about our country that people are drinking?
People are lining. I don't think any other country apart from Thailand, and I think South Africa has banned liquor in India. But New York has been reeling under corona. They have alcohol as essential services. Europe, it's available everywhere in supermarkets.
Also, New York is having more deaths in a day than we have in a week.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's absolutely, it's just a stupid Guju dry state mentality that's been thopoed on the whole country, which I think is ridiculous. And I think also this whole judgment of people standing outside the, thekas trying to buy is just very classist. Just because you see a poor man buying alcohol doesn't mean he's a wife beater or he's a criminal, he's some debauched guy who needs, who should think about his life. Maybe he just wants a drink, His business is shut. Corona everywhere. Just wants a bloody drink.
The kind of question journalists were asking, I saw it on the TV.
What? Like what?
आपकी उम्र कितनी है? He saw somebody with the white hair. So 61 साल में साला शर्म नहीं आ रही देखो दारू लेते हुए.
So ridiculous.
So didn't the guy in lights said तुझे क्या?
No. Then he's asking him कि what brand you are going to buy. And then he's asking कितनी बोतलें खरीदोगे?
Exactly. I saw an NDTV reporter.
तुझे चाहिए क्या? आजकल तेरी प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस फ्री की नहीं मिल रही साले रिपोर्टर. तुम तो दारू के कारण जाते हो ना प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस. हैं? जैसा कि हमें पता नहीं. साले यहाँ में मॉरल लेक्चर दे रहे हो.
This NDTV reporter met a guy and the guy said basically बहुत line है तो I'll come back again. So he's like आप बड़े दुखी लग रहे हो कि आपको मिली नहीं. वो guy is like नहीं मैं तो सब्जी लेने आया था तो मैंने सोचा साथ ही साथ वाइन भी खरीद के ले जाऊँ. वो भी बेचारा explain करे कि no actually I'm here for the sabji. I mean this kind of moralizing is ridiculous. It makes
so that you are able to hide that bottle. So anybody
like
carrying a bottle
also they do that.
is being considered
all chemists will put it in a black bag.
Or they'll pack it in a newspaper.
किसी को पता ना चले. So I mean this is the attitude. So obviously.
Mehraj, do you have any views on this now that Manisha has got it out of the system?
Not really. I mean, this is I think the one thing that should be kept in mind is because like doctors have said, experts have said that people who are like dependent on the drink and they have withdrawal symptoms. Actually, in the initial days of the lockdown where I stay, so there was this one guy, he came out in the middle of the night and started shouting, like the whole neighborhood woke up. And then next day we realized this was the case. So he was having withdrawal symptoms.
In Kerala there was a suicide also. I know one was reported. They may
people like that especially, I mean, for them it's as essential as medicine.
Right.
So you have to make sure that they don't suffer for lack of this. But on the other side also, I mean, it's not a simple matter also. If you are opening an establishment which is leading to overcrowding, I mean the whole purpose of shutting these things down was to prevent that. If it's happening, then you have to find a way for that. Right. And also I saw there were I think protests in Karnataka by women who said don't open the shops because I mean we're having problems at home after this happens. And if you remember in the last election, I mean Anand would know better, last election in Bihar, this was a huge issue.
Yeah, prohibition.
Nitish Kumar won a lot of women voters because then he promised prohibition.
I mean, I think alcohol is always going to be one of those which has pros and cons. But Anand, where are you getting your fix from these days?
Anand's a teetotaler.
As a lifelong teetotaler, I have no sympathy with anyone who was missing it.
I see. Okay.
Joyless
So Anand's motto is now piyunga na peene dunga. Haven't you seen Mard?
No. No.
In Mard, Amrish Puri has a famous dialogue कि आज मैं black dog पीऊंगा क्योंकि जब भी मैं
that was Sahansa.
Sorry. Oh yes. यार IAS में ये भी पढ़ना होता है कि तुम ये कर रहे थे कि पढ़ रहे थे आनंद?
इसीलिए तो फेल हैं.
कि जब भी मैं एक कोई रंगीन तितली देखता हूँ मेरे जिस्म में कुत्ते भौंकने लगते हैं और मैं ब्लैक डॉग पीता हूँ.
Is that a dialogue?
Yeah, it's a dialogue. Abhi Anand ne bola, it can't be wrong. So, okay, can we quickly talk about it? Anand can take the first lead on this. Just wanted to discuss this entire trains and labor. I'll just put out the context of this, Anand, and then you can give us your view. Most states around the country, with the exception of Maharashtra, and I don't know, maybe one of you can tell me why, have organized trains to take the migrants back wherever they are in the urban centers to their villages. Because as you can imagine, things are insecure, they're scared, there's health problems, they're not being fed here. And I know many people in Delhi who are organizing just people to be fed because there's just so many migrants sitting all over the place. So Karnataka had requisition trains, then they cancelled them because apparently, and this has been reported by newspapers and portals, including the Express, NDTV, etc., that Yedurappa had a meeting with builders and they said, साले ये सब चले जाएंगे तो वापस नहीं आएंगे तो जब building हमें start करनी होगी, there will be no labor. So he cancelled the train. साले तुम जा ही नहीं सकते वापस. अब तुम कैसे जाओगे 2000 kilometers? People started walking. And Tejasvi Surya, the bright spark, the Rahul to BJP, the only thing is he talks a lot more confidently, but he's as idiotic in my view. And he also has the additional benefit of being extremely bigoted. He said, what a master, bold and important move to make sure these guys can't go back. I mean, he didn't word it like that. His tweet is available. Now, then videos have emerged, the kind of places these guys are being kept in, the kind of conditions they're being kept in. They have no source of income. Although the Yedurappa government has done a decent job of making sure that there's some basic income reaches and rations are distributed, but it is still far from adequate, and that no state has those resources.
There's no social distance where the places where they're
So that is the context, and this has led to, at least in my view, among people who have some basic, because this is the story that there's an overlap of human interest, governance, and it's COVID. It is the perfect story to make primetime television, and hardly anyone went with it. So yeah, that's the context. Anand, your view on this?
Sorry, before Anand starts, this is not even reportedly anymore because the Chief Minister's office himself has put out the saying that we had a meeting with builders and we decided this.
So they have acknowledged it is because of the builder lobby. Yeah. Okay. Anand, your view on this?
See, restricting any kind of movement is not fair. It's in fact, it's a violation of fundamental right too. Because right to movement is guaranteed in the part 3 of the Constitution, which talks about fundamental rights. But there are some untold stories about migrants being and how, like say, Green Revolution in Punjab, Haryana, or Western UP. So the farmers, the Punjab farmers, Haryana farmers, Western UP farmers, so they are glorified, and rightly so, for having very productive fields and filling India's granaries. But even that was the sweat of migrant labor. And there has been a concerted effort by the landowners there to retain it. I remember in 2000, around the time when Manrega came, and some migrant labor had very high hopes that they now don't need to go to those estates. And but that was a very short-lived hope, and it was that's because Manrega is just a pittance and that cannot sustain them, and even that was poorly implemented. It is still there. So there were newspaper reports in Bihar that the agents of these big farmers in Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP were going to villages in Bihar to pick the labor and convince them to go back with higher wages.
Right.
And they came to very remote villages. One of them came to my village also, and he was from Western UP, and the labor had not gone back, and they came to convince him to go back. So it has been the fears of, say, builder lobby there, as you say it. I can relate it to what happened back then. So fear no, say, anxieties of the builder lobby, as you put it, say that what they will do. So it is somehow rooted in that. The charm of cheap labor is always there. And the fear of losing that is always there. So I hope that can reasonably explain that phenomenon. Yes.
Mehraj, you want to tell us what you think of this?
I think in hindsight, I mean, this whole, at least now, the lockdown, the severe lockdown that has happened, I think it's a moral abomination right now.
I think the lockdown was imperative. I don't for a second doubt that the lockdown didn't have to happen. I certainly have views on what could have been done to make sure there is food available. But the lockdown itself is too complicated for me to give a black and white to. If I were to say, if there was a referendum, should there be a lockdown or not, I would still vote yes. I would vote it with riders saying that you have to, of course, provide for certain things. Because the other side, it is so bad. And we've seen that in the world over, where they didn't do lockdowns. The numbers have been insane. So I don't for a moment doubt that the lockdown in India we've dodged a bullet. Now, I don't know if we'll continue to or not, but Aditya has just sent me an article, Aditya, a wonderful producer, that the Madhya Pradesh government, Shivraj Chauhan's government, who decided to break all social distancing norms to form his government and jump around with all the defectors and say, dekho main ban gaya. Now they plan to ease labor laws and factory to industry. In fact, I will quote from this piece in Business Standard. It says, the Madhya Pradesh government is planning to introduce a slew of changes to labor laws, including allowing more factories to operate without following safety and health norms, and give free hand to new companies to, this is quote, keep laborers in service as per their convenience, unquote. So I really shudder at what these labor laws are going to be.
It was a conscious decision of the Home Ministry to take all these migrant laborers, whoever wants to go back home, they should go back home. So they were arranging buses, they were arranging trains. It was a conscious decision of the government. Okay. Having said that, as Anand said, that right to movement is a fundamental right, period. Okay. I think on the part of the Karnataka, it's a state-sponsored kidnapping.
Right, yeah.
That's what I feel. That is, it's a state. I mean, if you literally see through the lens of laws, it is kidnapping. And then the way this Madhya Pradesh, Chief Minister is speaking, this is slavery. This will amount to slavery.
Exactly.
I mean, if you just force the labor.
I think what this one's action, Yediyurappa's action and Tejasvi Surya's tweet and him appearing on primetime defending it demonstrated was that they think something like this will be given a free pass. Even the questioning that was done to him was so soft, considering what he has said. And this was not by a Sudhir, or it was by India Today group, which are not typically I still have my problem with some of the buffoons there. But even there, it wasn't that, dude, what are you saying? It was still like that monkey balancing. In fact, I'll come to a mail around that. Manisha,
all the racism that migrants have had to face in the southern states, including Karnataka and Kerala, where there's this hostility that North Indians have come, and even for migrant laborers. Like now, why don't you use your own people, yeah? Now get someone from Karnataka, get someone from Bangalore, get local labor to work on your sites. Like, why do you have to hold Bihari, UP migrants to hostage like this? And secondly, I think their way home, the tickets or whatever the arrangements, should have been made by the builder companies themselves. That's too much to expect of them. But I think it's their duty. These guys, for all practical purposes, are their employees. Building companies, I think, account for maximum NPAs and stressed assets. So taxpayers are already supposed to be billing them out of their, accounting balancing sheet mess. On top of that, I don't think the state government should be also providing for their employees. These guys are their employees. If we criticize Zomato for not taking care of their employees, or we criticize Uber, Ola for not taking care of their employees, we should criticize these builder companies for not taking care of guys who are essentially their employees.
So do pay to keep news free and write to us at contact@Newslaundry with any advice, critique or suggestions you have. I repeat, contact@newslaundry.com. We will only read the emails of subscribers. On that note, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Sun liya Afrika, mufat khoro. Not to brag or anything, but Newslaundry Hafta features in the top 50 in the world on SoundCloud in the news and politics category for podcasts. So do subscribe and see what you're missing, because when the public pays, the public is served. When advertisers pay, advertisers are served. Subscribe, help keep news independent and free. All Newslaundry podcasts are available on iTunes and Stitcher and any other podcast platform.